There is a specific kind of discomfort that happens when someone asks you a casual question about your family. Maybe they ask what you did over the holidays. Maybe they ask where your parents live. Maybe they ask completely innocently, why don't you just talk to them? And for a second, just a second, you pause, not because you don't have an answer, but because the real answer is too long, too complicated, too heavy for a conversation that started this casually. So you say something vague, you change the subject, you give them the version that is easier to receive. And you carry the rest quietly, the way you always have. There is something deeply isolating about that moment. Because from the outside, your life looks ordinary, but inside, you are holding a family story that most people around you cannot see. And nobody really has language for it, not the people who ask, not always even you. This video is for people who have ever sat at someone else's family dinner, feeling like an outsider to something they never had. People who feel guilt in their peaceful moments. People who have given vague answers because the full truth would take hours to explain, and even then, might not be fully understood. What you are carrying has a name, and it is not simple, but it is worth examining carefully. Most of us grow up with the same quiet belief embedded into us. Family is safe. Family is unconditional. Society treats this almost like a law, a fact, something so obvious that questioning it feels wrong, even rebellious. And when someone says they are no longer in contact with a parent, a sibling, or an entire family system, the reaction from the outside world is often the same. But that's your family, as if those three words are supposed to settle everything. What that reaction misses quietly, but completely, is that proximity and safety are not the same thing. Shared history is not the same as emotional nourishment. And love, genuine love, does not always guarantee that a relationship is livable. Some relationships survive biologically long after they stop feeling emotionally survivable. And the people who eventually walk away from those relationships were not, in most cases, the first ones to stop trying. They were usually the last. They were the ones who kept driving long distances, hoping something would feel different this time. Who rehearsed difficult conversations beforehand, quietly in the car. Who forgave things that were never fully acknowledged. Who negotiated for basic understanding the way some people negotiate for much bigger things, slowly, carefully, with a lot of hope and a lot of disappointment. They were told that endurance was love, that staying was what good people do, that every family has problems, and that leaving was the easier, more selfish choice. But staying, really staying, through years of emotional turbulence is not easy. It is one of the quietest forms of exhaustion a person can carry. Here is what most people get wrong about estrangement. They imagine it happens after one enormous, dramatic event. A single terrible moment that breaks everything open, a clear before and after. But that is rarely what actually happens. Most of the time, estrangement is not an explosion. It is erosion. Slow, quiet, cumulative. It happens through 100 small moments that individually seem manageable. A dismissive comment about something that mattered to you. An important event where you felt emotionally invisible. A vulnerable conversation that somehow circled back to your failures. An apology that never came. A pattern that repeated and repeated and repeated until you stopped expecting it to end. You learn, after enough of these moments, to make yourself smaller. You stop bringing certain things up. You start filtering what you share. You learn that honesty in this relationship does not create closeness. It creates consequences. And so you become quieter, not because you ran out of things to say, but because you slowly learned that saying them cost more than staying silent. That is not a dramatic decision. It is not even a conscious one at first. It is what happens when a person is emotionally unseen for long enough. They start to disappear quietly, a little at a time, just to reduce the friction. Some pain arrives slowly. A relationship can decay through repetition just as completely as it can through a single rupture. And after enough unrepaired moments, after enough times reaching for something and finding nothing there, a person stops reaching. Not out of hatred, out of a kind of deep, bone-level exhaustion that is very hard to explain to people who have not felt it themselves. The exhaustion was not dramatic, it was constant, and constant is its own kind of heavy. If you have ever created distance from family, or considered it, you probably know that it does not feel the way people imagine it does from the outside. It does not feel like freedom at first. It feels like grief. Quiet, strange, lonely grief. The kind that is hard to explain because you are mourning people who are still alive. Mourning a relationship that technically still exists. Mourning something that, in many ways, you are not even sure you ever fully had. You might find yourself missing people while also knowing that contact makes things worse. That is not a contradiction. That is just what grief looks like when it is this complicated. And then comes the guilt during peaceful moments, the guilt on their birthdays. The guilt when something big happens and your first thought is a person you are no longer speaking to. The slow, recurring question, was I too sensitive? Did I overreact? Did I give up too soon? Your guilt is not proof that you made the wrong decision. Sometimes guilt is just evidence that you loved deeply, that you stayed long enough to feel the full weight of what the relationship was not, that you are the kind of person who takes these things seriously, maybe more seriously than was ever returned to you. What you were mourning was not always the relationship as it existed. You were mourning the relationship you kept believing was possible, the version of it you kept hoping would finally show up. The closeness that felt like it was always just one more conversation away, one more attempt away, one more patient moment away. Grieving potential is one of the quietest forms of loss there is. And estrangement can leave a person feeling a kind of emotional homelessness that is very hard to name, especially in a world that does not always know how to hold invisible family pain, where your loss has no ceremony, no clear beginning, no socially recognized ending. You are left carrying something real, in a context where nobody knows to ask about it. Eventually, some people arrive at a realization, not a dramatic one, not a sudden, empowering moment of clarity. Just a quiet, exhausted understanding that surviving a relationship is not the same thing as being nourished by it. That endurance, no matter how long or how sincere, is not love if it is only coming from one direction. That you are allowed to want more than just getting through it. Choosing distance is not a clean decision. It is not a victory. It is not rebellion. It is, more often than anything else, a last resort arrived at after years of invisible effort that most people on the outside never saw. Peace is not betrayal. Choosing distance does not erase the love you had or still have. It does not mean you stopped caring. In many cases, it means you cared so much, for so long, that continuing without change became something you could no longer absorb. Sometimes the healthiest thing a person can do is stop volunteering themselves for pain that was never going to stop arriving. That is not giving up. That is recognizing finally that you are allowed to stop. Walking away from a family system is one of the quietest and most devastating decisions a person can make. And most people who make it carry the weight of it in silence for years, without validation, without understanding from others, often without even fully understanding it themselves. If any part of this video landed somewhere real for you, if it named something you have been carrying without words, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already. You are not alone in this, even when it feels that way.